Welcome to our webinar, very important for our group Renew Europe and also for you and also from European Commission. Just weeks ago, the European Commission introduced the new LGBTIQ equality strategy and shaken up the world as it was the strongest international political declaration on the acceptance of the LGBTIQ community and promise of legal protection. The Commission challenged the status quo and committed to a process toward self-determination based on one's identity. Especially in the area of recognition of trans and non-binary identities, the Commission has not failed to impress with ambitious language, calling for accessible legal gender recognition legislation and procedures based on the principle of self-determination. Not only that the Commission has also endorsed implementation of third gender marks and further condemned the realms of requirements within gender recognition legislation across the member states, especially condemning trans sterilization as the most unhuman continuing sanctioned violation of human rights against trans persons. However, forced trans sterilization continues to be a requirement for legal gender recognition in 6 EU member states. At Renew Europe, we stand behind the Commission's proposal, as we strongly believe that trans rights are human rights. However, as we strive for equality and the principle of self-determination, we must ensure that we do so in all member states, not just in the West. That is why we have invited today representatives of ILGA and TGEU and trans activists from Finland and the Czech Republic to share their ideas with us. We are also very honored that Madam Commissioner Dalli accepted our invitation and will address us as the keynote speaker. There will be a space for question and answer, followed by a closing speech from my dear colleague Sophie in Veld. Please write down your question on livecast, or if you are here with us on Zoom, please write your question in the question and answer section on the left. And now, without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Commissioner Dalli. She has been the front runner and the face of equality in the European Parliament and in the world. She is the hero of LGBTIQ community in Malta. Thank you for accepting our invitation, Madam Commissioner. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Radka. And I really want to express my gratitude to Renew for your strong commitment in this area of policy. I really appreciate this because it really helps me in the work which I want to put forward. So I thank you again for inviting me to speak at this timely webinar on the crucial topic for the equality of trans people in Europe. This discussion touches on the most personal, the obligation of trans people to forego the right to their bodily integrity and autonomy in order to be recognized in accordance with their own gender in the National Register and on official documents. What could be more invasive than that? Everybody in the European Union should be safe and free to be themselves. Everybody, safe and free. This sentence is the opening phrase to the LGBTIQ equality strategy that we launched last month. It is also the basic value that guides my work as Commissioner for Equality. The forced sterilization of trans people remains a very serious issue in the EU. Requirements, including sterility, applying to individuals who wish to change their legal gender differ substantially between member states. In recent years, Denmark, Ireland, Luxembourg, and Malta changed their legislation on gender recognition towards a model of personal self-determination. Many of the other member states retain a number of medical requirements for the purpose of recognition of trans and non-binary people's gender, including forced sterilization. This harmful practice, which may have serious bodily and mental health repercussions, persists despite important case law of the European Court of Human Rights in this area. In the case of AP Garçon and Nicot versus France, the court ruled that sterilization requirements may violate human rights standards, as it makes the full exercise of one's right to respect for private life conditional on relinquishing full exercise of the right to respect for one's physical integrity. This is why the Commission's LGBTIQ equality strategy sets out concrete measures to protect and promote LGBTIQ people's bodily and mental health, and to improve the recognition of trans and non-binary identities. In this way, the strategy reaches out to the member states by flagging a number of issues from which the member states have the primary legal competence. This is part of the Commission's objective to present a comprehensive framework under which it can offer support and guidance to the member states to tackle LGBTIQ discrimination, also in the national context as a partner in the work that must be done. In this context, the Commission will foster member states' exchange of good practice on ending harmful practices, including the forced sterilization of trans people, and on how to put in place accessible legal gender recognition legislation and procedures based on the principle of self-determination and without age restrictions. Forced sterilization of women and girls are forms of gender-based violence and serious violations of women's and children's rights. Forced sterilization of trans people are no different. Because of this, the Commission will also include an intersectional perspective in the recommendation on harmful practices against women and girls announced in the Gender Equality Strategy 2020-2025. As the LGBTIQ strategy makes clear, trans rights are at the heart of the Commission's commitment to building a union of equality for all. Everyone, of course, including trans people, has the right to self-determination over their own bodies and should be able to change their legal gender without being subject to medical interventions. I thank you.
Thank you very much for your great remarks, Commissioner Dalli. We will make sure to follow up with you after the end of the webinar, and thank you for taking your time to talk to us. Thank you very much. And now we will move into the panel discussion, where each speaker will have time to present their work and opinions, followed by a debate and Q&A from the audience. Firstly, I am so excited to welcome here Leo Mulio Alvarez, Health Officer from TGEU. Leo is a psychologist and gender diversity trainer, and in his activism, he focused on supporting the development of legal gender recognition in Spain with a focus on self-determination. Please, Leo, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for having Transgender Europe be a part of this very necessary conversation. We were really happy to learn about their interests, your interest on the topic, and to bring attention to this very concerning requirement of legal gender recognition. As you know, forced sterilization is one of the most abusive requirements for legal gender recognition. But I find that people are often impacted by why this requirement, where does this come from? And I think it's important to understand the wider context and the background of why this is the case still for some member states in the European Union. Because, well, this requirement might be most harmful, but it's only one of the many signs of the social pathologization of trans people. Fortunately, these terms, pathologization, depathologization, are becoming more popular. They're more and more known, but I think it's important to understand what they really mean in practice. We could say that pathologization of trans people means understanding trans people's identities. So transness as an illness, as a problem, as if something was inherently wrong with us. When we hear about trans people, we often hear expressions like people who are born in the wrong body, right? So there is this perception that something is wrong with us, with our bodies, and that we need to be medicalized and be treated in order to be fixed, right? To be congruent again. And this is what actually leads to this mix of access to healthcare or healthcare practices or medical practices with legal gender recognition. This is because trans people have been medicalized since the beginning. And this is why states feel entitled to still intervene in our bodies. So we can talk about forced sterilization, but we can also talk about any other surgery, about hormonal treatments, about mental health diagnosis or psychiatric assessments. As we've been saying before, forced sterilization is still required in 5 EU countries, but in only 6 member states, self-determination is allowed, which means that in the remaining EU countries, some form of medicalization is still in place, whether it's forced sterilization or whether it's any of the other requirements, whether it's a mental health diagnosis or some kind of medical intervention or surgery or hormonal treatment. Denmark, for example, gives us the picture of how member states can move forward. We saw in 2014, this country became the first one in the EU to approve a law that was based on a model of self-determination. And it moved directly from requiring a diagnosis, medical interventions, even sterilization to a self-determination model. The law was not perfect, and it is now in the process of being changed. And it actually has one requirement that's still included in this law, which is the so-called reflection period, meaning that people who apply for this gender marker change will have to reapply or to show their interest after a period of 6 months to kind of confirm that they still want this gender marker to be changed, which in a way still implies that trans people may be confused, that we may not know who we are, and that we need to reflect and be sure of our identities. However, the government is currently committed to changing this and getting rid of this requirement after 6 years of experience with this law. So I think it gives us a good example of how self-determination based models only show a positive impact, and that governments are seeing this. And this is why more and more countries, more member states are either achieving self-determination or getting progressively rid of these medical requirements in order to someday achieve full determination. And it has a positive impact not only for trans people's health, dignity, the respect of our rights, but also for the wider society, because it is a way of acknowledging, it's a way of sending a message to society that our existence as trans people has to be acknowledged and respected. So it shows that there is a need to shift the paradigm of how we understand trans people in society, from pathologization to more of a human rights perspective, in which we understand that trans people are autonomous individuals whose identities, whose bodies, and whose rights have to be respected, and that we as trans people have been mentored and supervised and medicalized and diagnosed for so long, and that it's finally time that we're given autonomy over our identities and bodies. So moving away from forced sterilization is urgent. We know that it violates trans people's human rights, as Commissioner Dalli was mentioning before. We have the framework, we have the human rights framework, we have case law, we have the Council of Europe, we have the European Court of Human Rights. We have the EU and the recently released EU LGBTIQ equality strategy. And we also have another fundamental step that was taken by the World Health Organization last year when it passed their new international classification of diseases. It was finally approved. And in this classification of diseases, trans-related categories were removed from the mental disorders chapter and placed in a new chapter called conditions related to sexual health, which means that the WHO has publicly taken a stand on the topic and depathologized trans identities. So I think this is really important to take into account, and that member states are now obliged to implement ICD-11, this new classification. So in a way, they're obliged, it's mandatory now to actually depathologize trans identities. And we need everyone's involvement in this process. This is a result of many years of hard work by many people, by organizations, but it is really only the beginning. Because now with the WHO depathologizing trans identities, with the current, again, human rights framework, with the case law that we have, states have a very strong base from which to start moving towards self-determination. Trans people have the right to be legally recognized in their gender like anyone else, without having to give up their bodily integrity. And trans people must be trusted, and only us as trans people can know who we really are. So legal gender recognition should move away from medicalization towards self-determination, remove abusive and harmful requirements. This is long overdue. And on the other hand, we need to make sure that access to healthcare is also guaranteed on the same basis, again, self-determination. Many times we're faced with this fear as activists that if we ask for self-determination and get rid of these abusive medical requirements, that we won't get any more access to healthcare, and that trans-specific healthcare won't be accessible to us. So even though this is not the case for all trans people, many do need some kind of trans-specific healthcare. And so removing requirements for LGR should never impact trans people's access to care. And I think this has to be kept in mind, and that this field of access to healthcare should not be forgotten in the process, because a lot of improvement is actually needed in that field. And the same principles, again, should apply. In this case, we could be talking about self-determination, but also about informed consent, bodily autonomy. So we have many principles that can guide our legislation and protocols regarding access to trans-specific healthcare. But ultimately, the idea behind all of these changes is the same, that trans people should have control over their bodies and identities, both when it comes to healthcare, as well as when it comes to legal gender recognition. So these advances cannot wait any longer, and the EU, and I hope everyone who's present here today can definitely play an important role. The EU LGBTIQ equality strategy is definitely a big part of this process, and I think with this and all the other measures that I've mentioned before, I think we have all have an easier opportunity to raise awareness when thinking about the EU, to raise awareness inside the institutions, to organize trainings, to foster and participate in exchanges, in good practice exchanges with member states regarding LGR, legal gender recognition, to encourage and monitor the implementation of ICD-11. So there are many entry points, there are many things that can be done, and that should be done very soon to ensure that trans people have their rights respected. So we count on your support to make this change happen. It is also crucial that civil society is involved in the process, that is listened to make sure that the legislation that is developed really addresses the real demands. And we'll be here, happy to support during the process. So please count on us when working towards a more just society for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your input and for raising awareness and leading the narrative away from medicalized trans identities. I could not agree with you more than it's our responsibility to make completely healthcare accessible for all trans people, but not let the medical establishment limit transgender identities. Everything what you said is very important, and thank you for your input. Next up is Bára Soukupová from the Czech Republic, the president of Transparent, the main Czech trans advocacy organization. Bara is also political, and I am so happy to see her doing necessary legislative work to improve trans rights in the Czech Parliament. We are glad you made time for you, Bara. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for organizing this webinar and thank you for inviting me. First, let me introduce myself a little bit and our organization. I'm the head of NGO Transparent and we exist since 2015, and our goal is to help trans people on the individual, institutional and legislative levels. We organize support groups for trans and non-binary folks. We spread awareness on trans issues, work with the media and public to build a positive, real and unbiased image of trans people and their lives. We are trying to influence institutions, especially the medical system, to treat trans people with respect and dignity. Last but not least, we are trying to change Czech legislation on legal gender recognition, because the system in Czechia places many barriers on each individual trans person's way to legal gender recognition. Our medical and legal transitions are inseparably linked together. First, you need to visit a sexologist, internist, endocrinologist, and a clinical psychologist. Each of them can act as a gatekeeper and actually stop both your medical and legal transition. We have done a current survey. It is not published yet, it's real fresh, on how the medical staff is treating trans persons. We have identified several serious problems on their approach. Trans people in medical institutions are often being misgendered, forced to undress and unnecessarily touched, including on their genitalia, exposed to obscene speech, forced to lie, because according to some doctors, there is only one right way to feel and to transition, and when you are not conforming with those expectations, you are rejected. They are pushed to agree with the surgery, because that's what all trans people should want after all, according to Czech sexologists. They are asked about sexual fantasies, masturbations, sex practices. Their identity and sexual orientations are questioned because non-binary identity, asexuality and bisexuality is not recognized by some of Czech sexologists. After getting the diagnosis that is needed to further approach the transition, trans people are pushed to change their name to so-called neutral form. It is a choice from only a few foreign unisex names that sounds very strange in Czech. After 1 year of living in your preferred gender role, you can appear before the commission, which decides if you are trans enough to get surgery. Without approval of the commission, you cannot even have a mastectomy if you are a trans man. Another condition is that you have to be above 18 and to be single or divorced. After you are surgically sterilized, you can finally change your name to your preferred one, matching your gender, and your gender marker on official documents finally changes. This way of transition is okay for many trans people, but many of us are left behind. Not everyone wants to undergo a potential risky surgery, and not everyone is even able to undergo it, for example, due to medical conditions. There is no option to legal gender recognition for those who refuse to undergo sterilization, as well for non-binary people and people under 18, despite the fact that the recognition of teenagers' name and gender can actually save their lives. Although the European Court of Human Rights found that the requirement for sterilization is violating fundamental human rights 3 years ago, the Czech government still refuses to change the legislation. The Ministry of Interior is actively blocking any efforts for change. The government is afraid of public opinion on this. The Government Commissioner for Human Rights, Helena assures human rights organization that it is being processed, but actually nothing is happening. Therefore, we really welcome the efforts of the European Union to protect LGBTI+ people and their rights in all member states. I wish there was a legal gender recognition based on self-determination available for everyone without unnecessary and sometimes even harmful conditions. So thank you for organizing this and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Bara, so much for that and for sharing with us how difficult the situation is in our country, in Czech Republic. I really hope that the EU can give an impulse to Czech Republic to fix its law And until then, I will be excited to see you for their involvement in politics. And I am sure that my colleague from Renew Europe support me if we will do any action to our government to change this horrible law for LGBTIQ people and trans people. We will be in touch. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now it's my utmost pleasure to welcome here with us Alex Oksanen. Alex is chair of the Youth Committee and a board member of TRASEC, Finnish LGBTIQ Advocacy Association. Alex is here to share with us his unique perspective on the situation in Finland, as well as on the impact this has on the youth trans person. Alex, floor is yours.
Thank you so much. First, just to clarify, I am the chair of the Youth Committee of the Finland's biggest national LGBTQ organization, SETA ry, and I am merely a board member of the organization TRASEC ry, which is specifically an organization for advocating for the trans people's rights in Finland. But to get into what I am supposed to tell you, which is the effects of this forced sterilization to transgender youth in Finland. And as most of you probably will think when hearing the words forced sterilization, the first association you make is this vivid picture of eugenic practices of removing degeneracy from the population, which was very prominent in Nazi Germany. But in actuality, the nature of this is, in today's Finnish society, it's very different, since it's a much more subjective and complicated thing. The demands for a trans person to be deemed legally sterile in order to change their legal sex is only now being removed in Finland. And Finland is also the only northern country that still has had this requirement. But even if we have a long time concluded that such gross attacks to a person's bodily autonomy and reproductive rights should never be allowed, for some reason they have still stayed in our country, even though Finland has also been presented as this pinnacle of justice and equal to all. So I guess even we are not perfect in all aspects. This demand already stems from a system where the judicial and medical process of changing one's sex is intertwined, meaning you cannot just have one or the other. So in order for a person to be able to change their legal sex in Finland, you must first go through the painfully long medical transition process, meaning that one will be forced to live through a period of having medically transitioned, but yet still having one's legal sex stay the same. And this puts us transgender people in Finland at a heightened risk for discrimination and puts us in situations where, for example, people claim that our legal documents are not in fact ours, but someone else's. Now, what about the perspective of us young transgender people in Finland? Well, in the proposed renewal that is now being shaped out, persons under the age of 18 will not be able to change their legal sex, meaning they will not be given the same right to self-determination as people over the age of 18. What makes this really odd is that people cannot use the same arguments that they have used against restricting medical transition from underage people, saying that it is too much of an irreversible choice. Unlike medical transitioning, the process of changing one's legal sex, changing an F or M on one's passport, for example, it is completely reversible and should therefore be also available for persons under the age of 18, considering that us young people have the exact same right to self-determination as everyone else. And what makes the aspect of forced sterilization truly painful for possibly a lot of us young trans people is the fact that as we are only just stepping into adulthood, we are forced to make lifelong decisions about either choosing one's reproductive rights or the right to enter, example, university with one's own chosen name and legal gender. These are decisions that no around 20 or 19-year-old should have to make. Yet I and many other young trans people will still be forced to ask ourselves the question, children of our own or life of our own? Meanwhile, the renewal of the Finnish trans law has stagnated due to the coronavirus situation, which has taken all of our country's resources right now. This proves to us that the global pandemic right now has had dire and unexpected consequences on the progression of human rights. We have to remember that even in times of need and crisis, we cannot allow essential rights to bodily autonomy and self-determination be overlooked. And that's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. It's truly incredible, and your perspective is so valuable to our work. I am excited to see you take up future advocacy or activist roles. Thank you very much. And lastly, it's my honor to extend a warm welcome to Dr. Sianan Russell, Senior Policy Officer at ILGA Europe and trans and intersex activist. They are joining us to share their experience with policy work, trans-Pacific advocacy, and insight on the anti-gender backlash we are experiencing in the EU. We even got a taste of it on the Renew Europe Twitter, so I am excited to hear you address it. Sian, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ms. Maxová, and thank you very much to Renew for having us at ILGA Europe as part of this panel. As was said, my name is Keenan Russell. I'm a Senior Policy Officer at ILGA Europe. We are the European region of the International Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Trans, and Intersex Association. We represent more than 600 member organizations across 54 countries. The place that I'd like to start is actually talking about the framework that Ms. Dalli was presenting at the beginning of harmful practices, because I think the specifics around the next steps coming out of the LGBTIQ equality strategy are ones that it's useful for us to unpack a little bit. So firstly, what does it mean when we're talking about harmful practices? This isn't a meaningless phrase. It actually has a good deal of history in the international human rights framework. The most fundamental piece of that is the joint general recommendation from the Committee on the Elimination of Violence and Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, and the Committee on the Rights of the Child that they put out in 2014. And within that, that recommendation, there's a requirement that it be read with previous recommendations of both of those committees that make clear reference to the list of activities that fall under the framework of harmful practices. And in both contexts, CRC and CEDAW, those previous recommendations speak to forced sterilization. In the context of CEDAW, compulsory sterilization of women generally, and in the context of CRC, it focuses specifically on children with disabilities, but also discusses the freedom of all children to be free of all forms of violence, where compulsory sterilization also fits. So the sort of pieces of what can be a harmful practice clearly cover coerced or forced sterilization. A couple of pieces of language from that joint recommendation that I think are important for us to understand. The first of them is that harmful practices can be used to justify gender-based violence as a form of protection or control. So when we understand the kinds of practices that are under this umbrella, and assertions about sterilization of trans people to access legal gender recognition, the framework is almost entirely about protecting people from making a mistake, protecting people from changing their legal gender when they don't really mean it. And both of those things can be seen either as protection or control, or perhaps a bit of both. It's a false protection framework, though, as is the case with all harmful practices, where the thing being done to protect someone doesn't actually protect them, but actually causes them harm in the long-term effect of the activity. The second piece of language from that recommendation that's important is that harmful practices are strongly connected to and reinforce socially constructed gender roles. As my colleagues, particularly Bara, were saying in their interventions, it's clear that a sterilization requirement is about the enforcement of what a male or female body is supposed to look like, how it's supposed to be capable of acting, what it's supposed to be able to do, and those are socially constructed roles and stereotypes. We're perfectly comfortable, for example, with cisgender women being unable to give birth because of genetic or biological differences, or because they've chosen to have a hysterectomy. We're also perfectly comfortable with them being able to give birth. But when it comes to trans bodies, there's a certain type of discomfort that we have about what a body is able to do that is about our social expectations of that body as it participates in society and in the context of its gender. And the final piece of language that I want to highlight is that the harm of a harmful practice surpasses the immediate physical and mental consequences. And as my colleagues here have clearly indicated, sterilization as a compulsory piece of legal gender recognition goes far beyond the impact of just being sterilized, but requires us as trans people to make lifelong decisions about ourselves, often at a young age, to compromise our identity versus our bodily integrity. And these are not just immediate consequences, but ones that stick with us for the rest of our lives. And that's really well highlighted by the decision, first in Sweden and now in the Netherlands, to compensate trans people who are required to undergo sterilization under previous laws, acknowledging that harm was done not just in the moment, but longitudinal harm, which makes it to fit well into that framework. Specifically, the definition and the general recommendation is that a harmful practice denies the dignity or integrity of the victim, that it constitutes a type of discrimination, that it's kept in place by social norms, and that it's imposed by the family, community, or society, regardless of the individual's consent. I'd like to take that idea of consent a little bit further. It could be said that trans people are making a decision at the time of applying for legal gender recognition to be sterilized to gain access to legal gender recognition. While it's true that a decision is made, that decision does not legally constitute consent, because the International Human Rights Framework says that when any individual is required to choose between two of their fundamental human rights, that choice is inherently a violation of their rights and cannot constitute consent. In this case, the two rights that are being chosen between are the right to recognition before the law in the UN framework, or the right to private and family life in the European framework. These are the ones that allow an individual to have access to legal gender recognition and to identity documents that protect them from invasions of their privacy. And conversely, the right to freedom from torture, cruel, or inhumane treatment. And there's a clear history in the UN framework in particular of categorizing forced sterilization, and even specifically forced sterilization of trans people, as torture. You see that in reports from the Special Rapporteur on Torture, Juan Mendez, to the Human Rights Council in 2016, but we also see it in the European framework, for example, in the European Parliament resolution from 2014 on eradication of torture, where there's a clear mention of forced sterilization. And then additionally, there's a reference to harmful practices specifically in the Victims' Rights Directive within the EU framework. So this is a well-established concept in terms of international human rights law. And what's important for us to understand then is that the gender equality strategy first, and now additionally the LGBTIQ equality strategy, have promised to create a recommendation from the European Union to the member states regarding the specificities of harmful practices. And I would say that there are sort of 5 things to say about this. The first of them is that it's possible that sterilization could be mentioned in this recommendation without a clear tie to sterilization of trans people. And so it's really necessary in the political efforts to move the recommendation forward that we work to see that a clear reference to sterilization, including in the context of legal gender recognition, are included within the framework in the EU. The second is that recommendations coming from the European Union are not binding, but they are standard setting. And when you talk about the human rights framework, everything is about standards being set, someone being bold to say this thing violates human rights in our standards framework, and then the implementation of those things at the member state and local level. So it's really necessary to set that standard clearly at the EU level, particularly given that that standard is already set in the UN to indicate that these types of practices are not acceptable. The third piece is that there's already existing precedent, and again, my colleagues touched on this a bit before, both within the European Court of Human Rights decisions, as well as in decisions from the Social Charter, that sterilization in the context of legal gender recognition violates human rights. And the last two pieces take me into the other thing that you asked me to speak about a bit, Ms. Maxová, which is our expectations of pushback. And the anti-trans movements in the region. We're certainly seeing a very loud but extremely small minority of people making assertions about what legal gender recognition is or should be, about who trans people are, and about how we as trans people should have our bodies be governed by the state or by so-called popular opinion. I have a couple of comments to make about this. The first of them is that the role of government in a state, in a democratic pluralist state, is to protect minorities from decisions of the majority that would be otherwise discriminatory, harmful, or based on a lack of interest in the thriving of that minority. And so it's really vital that we not see human rights as something that should be put into the realm of public debate. There's a clear precedent that says that sterilization in the context of legal gender recognition violates human rights. That's not actually up for debate. And so I would go so far as to say irresponsible for states to act as though this well-set standard is something that we need to reopen, but furthermore, need to reopen in a way that allows people to assert that some groups of people should not have their fundamental human rights protected by the state. That's entirely inappropriate function for the state to be playing. The second piece is that there are a myriad of assertions about the consequences of self-determination-based legal gender recognition on, for example, gender equality protections, data collection, access to single-sex spaces. All of these things are not based in fact. They're based on fear-mongering and on evidence not present. For example, assertions that something could happen and thus we need to put provisions in place to stop it from happening. That also is not the role of government, to look to all the potential hypothetical negatives that could happen and create significant barriers that violate the rights of individuals in place to try to prevent those things from happening. To create a parallel, for example, I could go to the grocery store, buy a butcher knife, and use that butcher knife to harm or kill someone. If we were to make an analogy of the circumstances that are happening with transition-related legislative frameworks right now, the demand would be that I not be able to buy the knife without passing a psychological exam, or without a doctor affirming that I was not going to use that butcher knife for anything other than to chop my vegetables. Clearly, that's an overreach from government, and it's also based on a minority occurrence to try to prevent that minority occurrence, and instead harms all of the people who just want to be able to have soup for dinner. And so we need to look at the framework of the ways in which we regulate and not regulate from a position of fear. Trans people, the vast majority of trans people and the vast majority of people who transition, one, live much happier lives after experiencing legal gender recognition, while there are people who are unhappy and decide that it's better for them to transition back. The majority of those people also support access to legal gender recognition, knowing that they needed it and they realized it wasn't the right decision. Doesn't mean that no one should have access. So there are lots of conversations where the demand for policymakers really is to learn how to respond to the arguments so that you can say, this is a fallacy and here's the reason why. And that means close coordination with trans activists and with LGBTI movements generally, and being aware that these kinds of arguments are coming and we need to be on guard. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Sayan, for your words. This will be incredible instrumental to me and all of us at Renew Europe when we go forward and legislate on trans issue. It was very interesting for me also, and your experiences is great. And now we can move into the debate. And before we divide into questions from the live stream, I would like to ask you all, if you could pick up one country, this is doing a great job, and we should look it as the role model, which would it be? And do you think there are possibilities to replicate this in your country? If we can start from you, Sayan.
Absolutely. I would say the country that I think is doing the best job is probably Argentina. There's been an extraordinary law on gender identity in place since 2011 that allows access to legal gender recognition to all on the basis of self-determination. When a minor is involved, the state can appoint someone to defend the rights of that minor to access legal gender recognition. And linked to that law is confirmed access to transition-related health care to address the needs of trans people within the public health system. I can't really speak to my own country. I'm from the US, but I live in Belgium now. But I do think that everybody has the ability to think about trans people as important and contributing members of our society, and to create legal frameworks that value us rather than legal frameworks that stigmatize or marginalize us. So I like to believe that. I think that's part of why I'm able to do this work, but I won't speak specifically to a country. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Alex, can you answer?
Yeah, well, actually, since Sayan, you mentioned that you live in the US, and I would like to say that the United States has a more free model, since I assume that this varies state to state, but it has a more sort of informed consent model in place that is not centered around pathologization and like this medicalization of being trans is something that you, Leo, mentioned. And it is more about informing the patient about what the consequences of the treatment, but it is not centered around diagnosing transness, making this trans identity something that you can, as an outsider, diagnose in a person, when in actuality, only the person themselves can know how they identify and how they feel about themselves. So that is something that we could learn about a lot, in my opinion.
Thank you very much, Alex. Bara?
Yeah, I often use Malta as an example of country which has a very good legislation on trans issues, not only because it was the first or one of the first countries that has a legal gender recognition based on self-determination, but also because Malta itself is a very Catholic country, that it has like 98% of population Catholic. And our opponents often say, often are from like Catholic Church and so on, and they say like we can do it because there is so many Catholic people. We have different mentality, and I say no, it's not about Catholic or Church. It's about openness and hate. So that's it.
Okay, thank you. And last one, Leo?
Yeah, I agree with Bara that Malta is often taken as the best practice example in the EU, because we've been talking a lot about medical requirements, but we could also be talking about minors being included, about migrants having access as well, about non-binary recognition, and I think Malta has legislation that it's very comprehensive on so many areas about protection against discrimination when it comes to legal gender recognition as well, being inclusive of all trans people, really, including non-binary recognition. but it is difficult indeed to pick a country because many of the ones that actually have self-determination based legal gender recognition still have some requirements, or the implementation is not really working, or they're lacking some improvements still in other areas like healthcare, or they don't include minors or don't include migrants. Or so I mean, it is difficult to pick a perfect law, and I think member states are still really working on it to get to the best place that can be achieved.
Thank you very much. And do you have anybody question? If no, I will continue with a question from live stream. I would like to ask you all this question from live stream. Have you been able to observe that certain political parties or NGOs use transphobia to grab power of destabilize the society by stoking up fears in people? How important is the open and fact-based debate about trans issue to preserving of democracy in general? Now I would like to start opposite. Please, Leo, can you start?
Yeah, that's a great question, because we are indeed seeing this happening and more and more. So this is increasingly happening in Europe, and it is very worrying. Trans people are being used and actually creating this kind of panic, social panic, is one of the strategies that these anti-trans movements have when targeting trans people and trying to convince society that legislating for trans people's rights is damaging and is harmful for society. So fear is their strategy. We're seeing that happening, and it is coming from different places. We've been observing, and I know Keenan can also talk a lot about this, actors that are using these strategies coming from more of a conservative background or religious background, but also we're seeing this happening on the left as well, and from groups that are women's or feminist groups also, using this fear and conceptualizing trans people as possible anti-society actors, as an elite that is threatening society's values and other groups' rights, like when it comes to children's rights or women's rights. So it depends. There are similarities in the strategy. There are some differences in which things are explained, but it is definitely happening, and the main fear and panic strategies is being used by all of them.
Thank you very much. I think it's in Czech Republic it is a big problem. This for me, bad politician use fear for people and so on. And now we fight with these NGOs and this politician. Please, Bara.
Yeah, I totally agree with Leo and with you. We have seen in Czech Republic, for example, far-right party Tricolora, which uses this on their billboards. It's something everybody knows, that there are like two genders and they are recognized on genitalia. Nothing else. There is so that is very hard to get into really open and fact-based and deep debate about this, because the media and the politicians are not so open to put forward this debate. So we are trying to push it forward, but it takes some time. And meanwhile, it is uses against us, because, for example, like the deputy minister of Inferior are saying, look at Facebook. There is 65 genders you can use. No one sane can think this is something natural. You are all crazy. And this is the level of political debate in Czech Republic. So yes, I think it's a problem, and we have to face it.
Thank you very much, Alex. Please.
Yes. I totally agree with the sentiments mentioned here before. And I think also the surfacing of the new populist party in Finland is exemplary of this kind of revolting against, how would I say, erasing traditional values. And I also experienced myself that although the acceptance towards sexual minorities has taken huge steps forward, only now are we sort of talking about how we should treat also gender minorities. And I feel like it has become this kind of newer discourse to talk about if we should have give them the same human rights as was the discussion maybe 10 or 20 years ago about sexual minorities. So I do agree with the sentiment of it being a very like heightened topic, and then something that is like used as this kind of point of fear, and that we should fear our traditional values being erased, and instead this sort of globalist international gender bending ideology is taking place instead. It's a very clear picture that a lot of populist parties are painting right now.
Thank you very much. And Stoyan, please.
I mean, my colleagues have said quite clearly, and our work at ILGA Europe highlights the same, that we're seeing the instrumentalization of trans people for sort of unrelated political gain across the region, unfortunately. It manifests in a few different ways, but again, as colleagues have said, the things that is most concerning is we have a reasonable history of being aware of and documenting it coming from the right, from the far right, but we're seeing it more and more now from the left as well. One sort of really uncomfortable example was there was a political campaigning stunt in one EU member state right before an election this past maybe 3 months ago, where those advocating for a socialist party dressed up as sort of mocking trans women, but also mocking the other party, sort of asserting that their opposition party was bad, unreliable, a joke, by linking trans women and this opposition party. Honestly, what's happening is, when it comes to the kinds of jokes that society is comfortable with mocking trans people. And so it's a responsibility of all of ours to sort of disassemble that comfort, to assert when we hear jokes about people's genitals, jokes that questions a person's gender, jokes that for example, jokes about Donald Trump's hands being too small. These are all fundamentally rather transphobic, and we have a lot of work to do as society to take the bite out of those jokes, because for now a lot of political groups, but also NGOs, they do what works, and will make the kinds of mockeries or instrumentalizations that get people riled up. And so long as we continue to have this topic be one that gets people laughing or makes them uncomfortable, it will continue to be the kind of topic where people use us for political gain. And a piece that I think is also really worth us thinking about in terms of getting back to facts is that it's vital for cisgender allies to have a really strong, present voice in conversations about the rights of trans people. We can't get back to a democratic process that respects human rights if the only people talking about the rights and needs of trans people are trans people ourselves, because there really aren't a lot of us, for one thing. And for another, these conversations are violent. They're conversations that question our right to live, our right to bodily integrity, and to make decisions about our own bodies and our own lives. Conversations that regularly call us sick or ill or mentally ill, and that's exhausting. And so the only way to really get back to a more open, democratic type of conversation around trans issues is for cis allies to take up the mantle and help us carry some of the burden in these conversations, even when that's politically complicated, or even when you're having to stand up alone, because when you don't stand up, we're left standing by ourselves, and that's very unlikely to get us back to a place of more open democratic discourse.
Thank you, Sayan. Another question comes from the Parvi Palomou from Greek Transgender Support Association. Recently in Greece, also legal gender recognition has passed since 2017. A group of psychologists offered to give certificates for people to help them with policy checks. They propose for them to take a picture of documents such as hormonal therapy to show to the police. Our organization, the Greek Transgender Support Association, wrote a press release saying that this practice are dangerous and totally transphobic. What is your view on this issue? I think Bara now can start.
Yeah, I don't really get what's the point of it, because we don't have such problems or such a reality in Czech Republic, and yeah, I think there is totally like the police checks are totally separated from medical papers and so on, because you have to show your ID card, and that's all. I don't really get because I don't know the Greek realities, so maybe someone else will know the case better.
Okay, Leo, can I ask you?
I know I learned about this, but I couldn't quite remember, and I'm not sure I understood what the problem was. And maybe you can repeat again the question. I think you're muted.
Now I started. A group of psychologists offered to give certificates for people to help them with police checks. They propose for them to take a picture of documents such as hormonal therapy to show to the police. Organization in the Greek Transgender Support Association wrote a press release saying that these practices are dangerous and totally transphobic. What is your view on this issue?
Well, again, I think it's more of the same invasion of privacy, of people's privacy. Again, questioning trans people. It's just another way of manifesting how we're treated socially. So of course, it's definitely transphobic. And yeah, I don't know what else to say. Honestly, it's
for me it's unacceptable. What about Sayan?
As Leo started to say, what a practice like this does is encourage police and other state actors to not trust us, to not trust trans people, and revert that support back to the authority of medical practitioners. That authority doesn't belong with them. As the World Health Organization's ICD-11 update indicates, the World Health Organization believes that medical doctors should have no role in determining the gender identity of a trans person or of any person. The medical doctors are ill-equipped to do that, and in fact, incapable of doing it. Only the individual can tell what their gender identity is and can make determinations about that. And so this proposal, while on the very surface, I can understand the idea that trans people are being harassed by police, so let's provide them with documents that prove that they're really trans so the police stop harassing them. On the surface, that seems like a reasonable idea, but the problem is not with the trans person. The problem is with the bias of the state actor. The problem is with the bias of the police. So the change doesn't need to happen in my pocket with what I'm carrying around. The change needs to come from clear mandated training about what is appropriate in terms of interacting with the gender of any citizen on the street, for police, for other security officials or state officials of any kind. And continuing to put the responsibility back on the trans person to find their own way to navigate in society safely shirks the duty of the state to protect its citizens. So I agree completely with the Greek Transgender Support Association that this kind of suggestion that trans people carry extra documents to prove that we should be allowed to go out, frankly, it's rather medieval, and we've moved away from those kinds of practices with all sorts of other people, and have seen that requiring people to carry a pass to go on the street is a violation of their rights. This would be a new permutation of something we've already as societies decided that we don't want to do.
Thank you very much. And Alex?
Yes, thank you. I honestly agree a lot with what Sinan just said, but I would add that this is a big fear among activists right now in Finland, that we do not know how the renewal of confirming, or so to say, having your legal gender changed will look like, what the process will be like. So a big fear is that it will require some sort of proof of you having started your medical process or something like that, even though those two processes are supposed to be separate from now on, meaning that the judicial and the medical should have nothing to do with each other. But that meaning only that you would not have to go through maybe the full process of the medical process, but it might be that they would still demand you to have, for example, applied to start the medical process, having started it partly, or given even some like motivation on why it is that you wish to have your gender marker changed. And all of these are in a way gatekeeping practices that should not be put, because if a person wishes to change their gender marker, they should simply be able to do it without having any extra hoop to jump through. For example, a motivational letter, some kind of proof of started treatments or anything like that, because it automatically excludes some trans people that are not able to, for example, start the medical process or get the diagnosis, because it does in fact require a lot of time and resources that a lot of people do not have in disadvantaged situations.
Thank you very much. And now, last one question from live stream, especially for Cyan, but you can answer also. Question is, while AP Cargon held for sterilization is a violation of Article 8 in the ECHR, would I be right in saying that other forms of surgical intervention are still within the ambit of the margin of appreciation afforded to states? Cyan.
Yeah, I can start on this. First, I will say I'm not a lawyer. So just to kind of give myself my own caveat before diving in, it is my understanding that the court hasn't taken this question up thoroughly. And so it's true, it is within the remit of the margin of appreciation. However, the conversations that are happening and decisions that are coming within this conversation about margin of appreciation are dependent on the climate in the Council of Europe member states. And the same is true to a degree in any sort of human rights international organization of many states. They respond to shifts in the states and their understanding of the legal framework. So as we move further and further within the Council of Europe member states away from surgical requirements, and the World Health Organization's decision in this respect also is relevant as an international intergovernmental body. What fits into the margin of appreciation afforded to states, but also how the decisions are made also shifts. So at the moment, it is my understanding that it's within the margin of appreciation and states can do what they like. But as consensus shifts or as the trend shifts, I think it's very likely we will see that shift as well. And to just again reiterate, I'm not a lawyer, so please forgive any misunderstandings that I may have on that legal framework. To make that whole bit a bit more clear to a broader audience, the European Court of Human Rights has clearly indicated that sterilization cannot be required, that there is a red line there, but it allows each individual state to make decisions about a myriad of other requirements that they might impose on trans people, and there are a handful of principles governing the kinds of decisions that the states can make about those requirements. At the moment, the court gives what's called a wide margin of appreciation, which means that the states have a lot of opportunity to make different kinds of decisions when creating the legal gender recognition framework at the national level. But with the cases that are in front of the court and recent decisions, it's very possible that they may switch to a more narrow margin of appreciation, which requires more oversight and more proof of the state level necessity of those requirements. The wide margin of appreciation means that a state can essentially do whatever it wants, so long as it doesn't require sterilization, where a more narrow one means that any requirement could be adjudicated by the court to determine if that requirement is actually fit to purpose, if it serves to protect society or to protect the individual or what have you. But at the moment, most of the requirements are not being assessed in that way at all by the court. They just haven't taken the question, and they have focused on the things that are more clear cut. It's not a bad thing for them to not have made decisions that might have gone the wrong way. For example, if they'd taken up a question around a divorce requirement or a mental health requirement 15 years ago and decided that those requirements were perfectly fine, we would be having a very different conversation than we are now when they decided to delay the decision until there's more clarity among member states. And so it's very likely that in the future we will see more clarity as more member states move to remove mental health diagnosis, hormone, or other requirements affiliated with legal gender recognition. I hope that was clear.
Thank you very much. Does the other panelist answer the question? Leo, Bára, Alex? Nobody? Okay. We don't have any other questions. Thank you so much to everyone for the fruitful debates. Before you go, it's time for the closing remarks, and I am so glad to introduce Sophie in Veld, my colleague, dear friend, Renew for Equality President. Sophie, thank you for your co-hosting this webinar, and floor is yours for conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Radka. First of all, I would like to thank you and congratulate you for organizing this event. I think it's been very rich. I would also like to thank the panelists. I've learned a lot today. I have to say, if I'm responding as a person and not as a politician, you know, I can't help always having a feeling after this kind of debate, like, why are we having this debate? Why is this necessary? You know, I'm pretty sure that one day the day will come, we'll look back at this 100 years from now and just, you know, looking at it as like medieval practices or something, like something weird that they used to do back then when, you know, people didn't know better. Because I honestly ask myself, where does this fear come from? What are people afraid of? As a person, I can just not understand. I cannot understand, you know, why would we feel threatened? Where's the threat? And I think that brings me also to, it was mentioned also, the importance of people speaking out, but also role models or opinion leaders leading the way. And there we have a negative and a positive example. I think the negative example was J.K. Rowling, the very famous writer who made some, I can't remember the exact details, but some ridiculous statement about, I don't know, how she felt threatened somehow by transgender women. And I can just not relate to that. I'm just thinking like, where's the threat? Why do you feel that way? And the positive example was in my country, there was or there is actually a what they call a makeup artist who has her own YouTube channel. It's called Nikki Tutorials, and it's very, very famous. Okay, I confess I'm not really into that kind of stuff, makeup and so on, but she's very famous, has 1 million followers. And then earlier this year, she came out as trans woman, and that was, people were like, wow, you know, somebody that you know was so famous and somebody that I like so much is a trans person. All of a sudden it became something very, very positive, very cool, you know, and it also gets people thinking. So I think that's the kind of thing that can do more than 1,000 resolutions from the European Parliament. So that was very, very good. It was already mentioned that the Netherlands had a law on forced sterilization from 1985 to 2014. And just this year, the government has decided, or it has actually already apologized. It's made a formal public apology, and there will be some form of compensation payments. Of course, it's not going to be very, very much, but I think it meant a lot to people. There've been a lot of people who made statements saying, you know, even if it doesn't help me anymore, it means a lot to me. I also think we've been talking a lot about you know, bodily integrity and autonomy, but I think there's one thing that we have not discussed a lot, and that's just the right to family life and to procreation, you know, the right to have children. And I think that's another fundamental right that's being violated. Incidentally, because you mentioned at the start, or no, it was Commissioner Dalli who mentioned at the start that this is affecting women and girls, but also men. Huh? It's the same. So, and then I also think if you make the comparison with let's say not trans issues, but for example, you know, if people argue that being trans is indeed a pathology, it's an illness, and these people shouldn't procreate, I look at a lot of parents around the world who are abusing their children, beating their children, ignoring their children, and did anybody ever have to pass a test on whether they were a suitable parent? I don't think so. You know, if you're cis, hetero, whatever, nobody ever questions your suitability as a parent or your suitability to procreate. So all in all, I really hope that, I mean, we will be pushing together from the European Parliament, we will be pushing the issues to at least get the 6 countries on board, which are still, you know, where there's still forced sterilization, but also address all the other issues that come with it, which have been so eloquently presented in today's debate. And I do hope that one day we come to the point where we ask ourselves, why were we discussing that? You know, where we are not looking at people anymore as you know, people having to fit into a box, but just individuals, just people. Thank you very much for doing this, Radka, and for your commitment to this cause. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie, for your great views on this problem. You are totally right. Why we are speaking about this issue. And now, before we finish this webinar, I would like to have one last question, very quick. I would like to ask you, we now have EU leaders here in Brussels. If there was one thing you would like to say to them, what would it be? We could start from Alex. One thing.
Yes, thank you. I would, I guess I will use my one comment to also comment on what Sophie, you said. And it is the story of a activist friend of mine. And you mentioned this right to family life, and not only right to bodily autonomy and to self-determination, but also right to family life. And this friend of mine told me how they were pressured to forego sterilization without ever presenting any option of, for example, freezing their eggs or anything like that. And now, several years later, as they have done that decision as a young trans person, the position that I would be right now in, they regret so greatly not looking into other options and like going into that pressuring of sterilizing because they were so young and not knowing the consequences of those actions and how they would be able to regret it in the future. And so I guess I do want to highlight that it is not just bodily autonomy, it is just not only self-determination, but it is also such a fundamental thing as right to family life. And all of these three aspects should be taken in equal amount to consideration, not just one of them.
Okay, thank you. Bara?
I would say that trans people are people as anyone else, and the trans rights should be protected as rights of everyone are protected, and that we are not just some kind of sensation which needs to be correct, but the main thing we need is for society to recognize us as a people and to have a human rights as anyone else.
Thank you. Leo?
Yeah, I would invite everyone to really talk about this with everyone around them, to realize both in their institutional or professional role, but also in their personal life, like Helena was saying, we need a cultural shift. This is not only about policies, this is not about imposing new laws that we want to pass, but it is about the culture and society's values changing. And that takes a long time. And there are many ways in which we can do that work. So I would invite everyone to think about what are these ways that I can, what are the ways in which I can support trans people's rights? And there are many things we can do in our personal life, in our professional life. So bring attention to the topic, talk about it, learn if you need to learn. And also, I think it is important also when we think about trans people to think of these issues as an opportunity to actually question ourselves and think about what do I think, what does gender mean to me? What is, for me, what is a man? What is a woman? What makes me a man? What makes me a woman? And really start questioning your own beliefs around gender, because that's really what's limiting us, what's limiting people and society. And I think often people find difficult to support trans rights or to not get lost in all these very complicated terms, or when we talk about anti-gender movements and these myths that Keenan was mentioning before, many people are like, wait, how do I want to support trans people, but I don't really understand what's happening. So, and I think when people really question themselves, learn about gender, learn about themselves, it comes naturally. We're not talking about some other people from some other planet. We're just talking about people who have an identity, and everyone has an identity. We're talking about our needs, our bodies. Everyone has a body and has needs regarding healthcare. So I mean, we're talking about universal concepts. And once everyone can relate to those, it will be much easier to really work towards that.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, Sayan, please, one thing.
Trans people are tired, and it's really vital that people who want to see the human rights of everyone protected and promoted as we are guaranteed step into this fight and help trans people to get through this moment where every day the media spins negative stories or displays the bodies of our siblings who were taken from us violently. This community is exhausted, and it needs strong vocal allies who are willing to get into the muck of fallacy arguments and discuss nuance with the opposition to just make it through this period. So be bold, be brave, and stand with the trans community in this moment where it is taking a political risk, it is taking a social risk, but the consequences have to outweigh that potential risk. The consequences of seeing the trans community crushed one by the societal pressure we're facing. So please take risks with us.
Thank you very much. It's very strong. Trans people are tired, but true. For me, this webinar was very important. A few points from my side. Very important is education. All society, not only children, but teacher, politician, officers, all society. And we politicians should be stronger to push your rights. I can say that Renew Europe is a great political group for this, and we are very strong, as Commissioner Dalli said at the start of this webinar. Important is very discussion and positive examples, because I know positive examples and data. And it's not easy also for our politician, but I promise that we will do anything is possible from our side, from Renew, to do good politics for you. Thank you, and thank you all for coming to this webinar and for this amazing discussion. We will use the webinar as a stepping stone for follow-up action to support the fight against forced sterilization on the European as well as national level. Be strong, be patient with us politicians, and it was very nice to see you and discuss this question, this topic. Thank you very much, and have a nice day. Thank you.
Thank you.